Welcome back to the Save It for Parts channel. Today we're at the former Calumet Air Force Station in Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula, and we're here to check out this old disused Air Force radar base and meet the people who are turning it into something new. So nowadays it is known as the Open Skies Project. I've gotten a hold of the new owners and they've offered to show us around, let us tag along on one of their history tours and learn more about this fascinating aspect of U.S. Air Force history. I was excited to visit Mount Horace Greeley and the Open Skies Project for a few reasons. Not only is it just a cool place to check out, but I am a big fan of Cold War military history, something that is somewhat forgotten today, especially for folks in my generation who were born in the 80s and grew up in a period of relative peace between the world's major superpowers. I also grew up in Alaska and went to school up in Fairbanks, and there were a ton of Cold War facilities very similar to this scattered all over the state of Alaska. We had radar stations, dew line sites, White Alice communication facilities, Air Force bases, all kinds of stuff like that. So it's really interesting to see a site like this, and especially to see a site that's being preserved. And then yet another reason that I was interested in this site, last year we went up to Carp, Ontario to another Cold War facility. We toured the bunker there and we toured the former NATO satellite facility, and then we came home with an 18-foot geodesic radar dome. So I'm installing that out at Sandland. We've got that partially installed. We've got a few more things to do with it, but we're building our own little weather satellite radio astronomy facility that looks a bit like the geodesic radar domes that would have been here on Mount Horace Greeley back during the Cold War. The Calumet Air Force Station opened in the 1950s, serving as an early warning radar site during the Cold War. Located on top of Mount Horace Greeley, this was an Air Force facility with no runway or aircraft, although a non-functional T-33 jet was on display at the front gate. Initially, the station functioned as a ground control intercept and warning site, guiding fighter jets from Kinross and Sawyer Air Force bases towards any unidentified aircraft approaching the U.S. In the 1960s, the station was upgraded and became part of the Semi-Autonomous Ground Environment, or SAGE system. In the 1970s, the site became a backup interceptor control site. This meant that it could take over if the main SAGE center at K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base were disabled. The station saw several upgrades and redesigns over time, with several radars being replaced with newer models. The main control building was also expanded and enlarged. The base featured a self-contained community for servicemen and their families, including houses and recreational facilities. The remote location in rural northern Michigan meant that it was considered a hardship posting, although some people enjoyed the area so much that they requested to be stationed here. The site became obsolete by the 1980s as Cold War threats were shifting from bombers to missiles. The site finally closed in 1988. Afterwards, part of the base was used as a reform school for troubled youth from downstate Michigan. The school closed in the mid-2000s, with the base sitting vacant for several years. In 2021, the property was purchased at an auction by a group of Michigan residents and became the Open Skies Project. The group plans to preserve and restore the site, eventually creating a museum, a campground, and other projects.
My name is Zach Garner. I'm one of the members of the Open Skies Project. That's a group of friends and family that went in together and purchased the former Calumet Air Force Station back in September of 2021 with the intention of preserving and restoring the buildings up here to kind of make a bit of a time capsule. This is one of the last stations that's still fully standing like this, as it existed the day they closed it down. Almost all of the rest of them have been demolished, repurposed beyond recognition, or they were much smaller and they've been parceled off and sold off to multiple different owners. So this gives us a really good opportunity to really show people what this looked like back in the day.
We're now working our way into the residential district. This is where the enlisted families would be housed, as well as the academy staff in the 2000s. Basically, if you had a spouse and kids, this is where you could stay. Although there would be others who would have to commute from Calumet and Houghton because there was quite a long waiting list to actually be on site here. We're very fortunate with a lot of the buildings here. The bones are still pretty solid. It's just the superficial damage from vandalism and weather that has caused what we see today.
All right.
You are now.
Bomb shelter.
That's just a hole in my kitchen.
We'll make your roommate dig you one, so.
Huh, okay. Yeah, it's not big. This is about the ceiling height, but it kind of goes over here a little bit. So what if the bombs fell? He had to like throw the stove out of the way?
I guess. I don't know what his plan was. I don't know if he thought that far through.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so here's the little bomb shelter under the floor. Cool.
We originally heard about this because about half of our group went to Michigan Tech. It was a very popular destination for urban exploration at the time. Ourselves included, we came up here a few times over the different years, and we always joked to ourselves, like I'm sure a lot of people did, if we ever get the chance to buy this place, we gotta try it. Well, that opportunity presented itself, and at first we were kind of like, yeah, look, it came up for sale, we should try and buy it, like we always said. And then we started looking more into it, and learning more about the history, and looking at the economics of the area up here, and we decided, you know what, this would be a really cool thing to buy, and a really cool thing to preserve. And so we did. We did not expect to win the auction. We expected a developer to come in and drop a ton of cash and basically redo it all into some modern resort. But here we are.
So, what we have here, these are the Gator towers. These are the ground-to-air transmitters and receivers. This is the receiver array that we're looking at now, and then on the opposite side of the property is the transmitter array. But this is what the station used to communicate to the fighter jets that were flying in the air. Each tower would have had its own antenna with its own frequency, so it had a wide net to cast. As early as 1961, they had the ability to send a data pulse to the fighter jets, giving them information and coordinates they needed to reach their destination. Basically, it was the earliest form of autopilot you could imagine. They even had the ability to arm and fire weaponry on the aircraft from this site using these towers. Probably some of the coolest structures on site, in my opinion, as well as some of the oldest. They were the first put in place along with the main structures, and it's a testament to how well they're built that they're still standing today with practically not a lick of rust on them.
I have a lot of favorite things about the site. My favorite building, I guess, is definitely the Gator towers. I just love how they look. I know they're just antenna towers, but something about that catwalk on the outside just makes them look really ominous and really cool. I love the remoteness of the area up here. It's very different from anywhere else where you can hear a car coming from a few miles away and know exactly what road they're on and where they're turning. And the uniqueness of a lot of the buildings up here. You know, you don't get during the Cold War, they were figuring a lot of stuff out as they went, and they were not afraid to try stuff. And that's very evident in some of the construction up here, where they were just like, you know what, make the wall 5 feet thick. And then, you know, we'll see if it falls down in an explosion. So those kind of buildings are super cool. But they all tell a story of what the mission was of all of these radar bases, and it's really untold, and we didn't even know most of it when we originally purchased the property. It was only through the years of research that we really started uncovering a lot of it and realizing just the sheer scope of all of this stuff that happened during the Cold War that's just not talked about. Most people are completely unaware that it ever happened.
This is where the single enlisted would be housed, as well as the academy students in the 2000s. This is the rec center. This is where the NCO club used to be, which is basically your officer's bar. Across the street, this is the mess hall. This is where everyone would eat. They did 4 meals a day. One of those was a midnight chow for the night crew. Over here on the right, we have the medic building and the military police office. The medic side had its own dentist's office and x-ray room, so it could cure any minor ailment you had. If anything too severe happened though, you'd have to get shipped off to K.I. Sawyer's Hospital in Marquette, which is a nice 2-hour drive on a good day, so hopefully nothing crazy happened in the winter. And then on the end here would have been the BX, known as the Base Exchange. Here you could get a new pair of boots, a new uniform, shaving kit, comic books, cigarettes. Kind of like a camp store or canteen is the best equivalency we can think of. So this large metal building here, this is the powerhouse. Inside were 4 emergency generators. They were 500 kilowatts apiece. They ran on diesel.
Some of these, basically, this was where all the underground primary went out from the generators out to the mini substations they have. And if you look at here, watch your head.
Yeah.
mean, like, seriously thick cables.
We are 1,540 feet above sea level. We're currently walking towards a cement pad on the ground. This used to be another foundation to one of the older towers. And this is the starting point of the natural tallest peak of the mountain, Mount Horace Greeley. Over this direction, we have our diesel tanks. There's one above and then two below behind the wall. Those were simply to feed into the powerhouse. Excuse me. The small building next door, that was the original engineering and powerhouse building at the start of the base. We have the telecom building. This is what would have communicated to the outside world.
So they had this copper screen around the whole thing.
Okay.
But it wasn't to keep signals out. It was to keep the telephone signals in. Okay. Otherwise, it would interfere with the radar.
Okay.
So it's like a reverse Faraday cage. It's like keep the stuff in, not out. We've had a lot of veterans come up here that served up here or served at other radar stations, and they were very compartmentalized in what they did. A lot of the veterans that served up here in particular didn't even know that there was a fallout shelter, which surprised us a lot because it's not really hidden. It's very prominent where it's at up on top of the mountain. But they were unaware that it existed and probably would have continued being unaware that it existed in the event of a nuclear war. So it makes you wonder what other kind of stuff like that would have been up here. The other thing that you'll notice is, if you look here, you see where like the ceiling is really high?
Yeah.
And see how it drops down for this part? This room above us is the sage room where all the scopes were. And the floor it was a floating floor and it was sitting on springs. So it could absorb the shock wave of a bomb without everything going offline and like destroying itself. So,
If you could imagine, half of this would have been bunk beds, and the other half would have been tables with bench seats. In the back corner, we have a ladder going to an escape hatch back to the surface. Between the hatch on top and this bottom swinging door, it would have been filled with sand. So in case an explosion were to go off, it wouldn't come down through there and into the room. Also at the end, you'll see the Quonset ceiling. That used to be the original dimensions of the bunker, spanning the entire length here. But when they built the building above us, they tore all that out and built this more rectangular style that we see today.
The amount of bedrock that they had to remove from this place had to have been insane. Because we are at the top of the mountain, the average soil depth up here is like 3 feet until you hit bedrock. And I think honestly that's why a lot of these buildings have survived so long, because there's nowhere for them to settle. There's not really a whole lot, there's nowhere they can go based on where they are right now. But that also led to some other challenges when they were building this. The water and the sewer infrastructure is encased in a insulated concrete underground. I guess one of the really cool things that we learned just from looking at the prints, they heated all of these buildings with steam, but they also include, and all of the steam was above ground. Big pipes and stuff like that. There's probably a picture here somewhere. Yeah, you can kind of see them here. So like these steam pipes were all above ground to all of the different buildings. But they included what they called steam tracers that went around all of the pipes underground as well. That kept everything from freezing.
At the height of the Cold War, they had gained a bunch of extra funds to reinforce this site, mainly in case another place was to be bombed, say K.R. Sawyer or Duluth. This was going to take up the tasks and operations in its stead. So this was basically Plan B for the continued defense of the country in this region. What they ended up doing with some of those funds is they actually built a shell outside the original. So this is 2 buildings in one. The outer shell consists of 2 to 3 block thick walls with sand poured in between, a metal girder roof with concrete poured on top. So this is practically just as bomb-proof as the bunker we were just in. When you first enter the building, the original is painted in yellow. There'll be then an open air gap hallway, and then there'll be the actual outer shell that you'll be able to see how thick that is, protecting everything inside.
But basically this was, the high security clearance. This is where all the antenna cables came into. This is where all the scopes were. But when they upgraded the site to the backup intercept control, instead of building a new building, they just built this whole shelter building around it.
That is
You look
wild.
Like you can see the girder, the super narrow girder space.
I never noticed this before.
Yeah, this is a double thick wall. There's sand in this wall
Okay.
on the inside. So it's like layer, sand, layer. This entrance here, they would have actually kept this blocked in. It was the temporary block wall here. And so if there was ever a blast, it would go around the corner and dissipate before, like, fracturing the building basically. And then they would remove the wall here if they needed to move equipment in or out. You can see the cable trays where all the wires, or all the antenna cables came in.
And everything makes a dog leg for blasts.
Yeah, and that was the whole point, was dissipated around corners.
Yeah.
The Faraday stuff that you're looking for is in this room. So this is like very early data center type stuff. You got the raised floors, you got the cable trays, but you got up there the shielding in the ceiling. So this is the smaller part of the fallout shelter. The stage room is on the other side.
Okay.
This wall right here is another double thick wall filled with sand here. But this room is completely soaked when we bought the place. We redid the roof, and now it's nice and dry. So the original room would also have been on springs, and this would have been 3 tiers. So in the back, there would have been like an overlook tier, and in the center here, there would have been like a stage area, which is where the scopes would have been. And then up here, the stage didn't exist, but there would have been the big board, the plotting board, where they would have had a map of the airspace, and they would plot all of the tracks of all of the jets that they were tracking. Probably the most popular story that we've heard is the Kinross incident, which was an incident where a fighter jet went missing over Lake Superior, intercepting a bogey, a UFO. They didn't know what it was. It turned into somewhat of a conspiracy, although once you look at a lot of the evidence, it seems pretty likely that there was some kind of structural failure and it just crashed into the lake. But that didn't stop it from, that was during the UFO craze, and it didn't stop it from kind of being looked at with that kind of, those kind of glasses on. That incident brings a lot of context to what happens at these radar stations, because it really puts together the pieces of how the people here at the facilities would have communicated with the fighter jets and what they would have said and who had control of what and how the radar tied into all of it. All the way down to the very specific specs of the radar that they were using. What was the resolution? What was the speed of the rotation? How fast could they update? So it brings a lot of perspective into that kind of stuff. When they did the Buick upgrade, they built the rest of this building and they moved all this stuff to the other Sage room and then turned this into a briefing room. These were designed to have continuity. Oh, wow. And this entire room is shielded. So like behind everything, this is all metal. There's lead in the floor, it's a lead lined floor. You can see like this is where the continuity ends here. Wow. Like this old school pneumatic stuff. There's on the other side of the wall here, there's a beef compressor that's still over there. I'm really happy this is finally drying out. So this room has been flooded for probably 2 decades.
Right, I remember, yeah.
So we finally redid the roof on this half of the building, and now it's finally, you can see this is dry. We are not sure if there's still springs under this floor, or if the springs were on this floor and then there was another floor. Because we know that there was another level of flooring in here.
Okay.
You can see we drilled a hole to see if we could tell.
And this is outside of the original building again, right?
It's part of this room is part of the original building.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, it's outside, there's no other way to get into it. And this room is what had the rifle racks at the Omaha Air Force Station.
Oh, okay. Okay, interesting.
We're not sure if it was just we're not really sure if that was where they kept their weapons or...
So we can see this yellow wall on the left is the original comms building, and then the entire reinforced shelter building was built over the top of it. And then we have some of these walls here with the right angle dogleg entrances for blast deflection. So over here you can really see the difference of the old building on the right. This is the roof line, and then these blast deflection walls for the entrances, and then the new building just overwrapping the entire thing. So this direct entrance would have been blocked up unless they were bringing in big equipment, and then in normal use the entrance would have been around the dogleg and then in through there.
It has been interesting to see the different ways that things were constructed over the decades. For example, we started gutting out one of the bathrooms in this building to renovate it back into a working bathroom again. And you can tell the years that each layer happened. You know, the 70s was this year with the brown wooden particle board, all the way back to the 50s, and you can just tell each style the deeper you get into the buildings. They operated a height finder and they operated a search radar. A search radar is exactly what you think. It's a big dish that spins around and it picks up any kind of anything up in the sky, but the earliest radars could not tell you the altitude of whatever it was. So they would have a separate radar that was flipped on its side 90 degrees, and it would basically bob up and down to get the altitude.
So we're currently climbing up the height finder radar tower, and the wind up here is about 20 knots gusting to 40, so I'm having to do a lot of voiceover later on to make up for it. The other radar tower that you saw earlier, the taller one, was the search radar, and that's still an active cell phone site, so we can't visit that one. But the height finder tower here has been fixed up, remodeled, and had some new safety railings installed, so people can visit that, and it's become part of the free tour that the Open Skies group puts on. They got a few government grants to do some of the safety work up here, some of the new railings, some of the clean out, some of the remodeling, and this area up here, including the radar towers and the radar building that we were just in, the double-walled, sheltered, bomb-proof building, that is all supposed to become the new museum site. So some of the equipment that you saw earlier when we were talking to Zach is going to be moved in here. They're going to have displays and oral history, posters, artifacts, anything that they can find that ties into the history of this site. So this is a really ambitious project, and these guys are putting a ton of work into this. They have already cleaned up a lot of damage. They have already cleaned up a lot of decayed areas. They've replaced major sections of the roof on the radar building. And while some of the structures may still look like a bit of a bombed out post-apocalyptic wreck, things are really improving around here, and they're improving really quickly. So that is really cool to see.
Our big picture goal for this entire facility is to repurpose as much as we can without demolishing anything and keeping the general look and feel of at least the exteriors pretty much the same that it was back when it was Air Force. We'll repurpose most of the buildings to what they would have been. Rec building will continue to be a rec building. The barracks will be turned into some kind of housing units, whether it's for seasonal workers, short-term rentals, long-term rentals, apartments. It's hard to say. We're still not really 100% sure what we will be allowed to do up here either. The zoning is fairly loose, but building codes have come a long way since the 50s. And so that will be a big factor in what we can do with some of those buildings. We'd like to turn the dining hall into a restaurant. We would like to turn a lot of the administrative buildings into usable office space or conference space or general purpose areas that people can use. And then the top of the mountain where all of the unique radar buildings are, we're going to turn that into a museum. It's also it's the top of the mountain, the highest point, really good views, and we think that that's important to preserve and let people come see and experience because it's fairly unique. We've started our small collection of museum stuff here. We've got more than enough to fill that entire building with graphics and information and stories that we've heard from veterans, and we're excited to get to that point. I think our biggest hurdle right now is water. Because of the groundwater contamination and lost easements over the years, we don't currently have any running water up here, and we don't have an easy way to get running water up here. So that will be the biggest hurdle that we have to face. Once we can get past that, and we have some ideas, but they need to be fleshed out a little bit still. There's some red tape to cut through. Once we get through that, everything else should really fall into place. This has been a really exciting project so far. We're only 3 years into it, and I'm looking forward to spending the next 30 working on stuff, learning new skills, meeting new people. It's been awesome so far, and I have to imagine it's going to continue to be so.
So once again, I'd like to give a big thanks to Zach, Ian, and the rest of the Open Skies Project crew for letting us come up and visit, showing us around, and sharing their passion and dedication to this massive historic preservation project. This is truly a labor of love, and their love for this site is super evident in the work that they're doing and the stories they tell. If you'd like to check out the Calumet Air Force Station for yourself, I'll put links down below to the Open Skies Project. You can check out their website. You can buy some merch to help them support this project, like this nice t-shirt here. And if you're in the area, you can come up and get a free tour. Now, I would like to mention they don't appreciate people just showing up. They would like you to get permission, contact them first. Don't go snooping around, don't trespass on the site. They do have really good security, and they don't appreciate kids showing up in the middle of the night with crowbars and spray paint, so don't be that kid. If you do contact them first and get permission, they are super nice people, they are super cool, and their location here is also super cool. So if you live in northern Michigan or you're visiting Keweenaw Peninsula, shoot the Open Skies Project an email or a call. Find out when they're doing their next tour and come see what's going on up here because it is really neat. If you'd like to learn more about the smaller radome project that I mentioned earlier, I'll put links to that down in the description below as well. If you'd like to support videos like this or any of my other projects, I do have a Patreon page and a YouTube membership, so you can subscribe to that. Thanks to everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time. As you might notice, it's been super windy all weekend, so a lot of my exterior shots, at least the audio, didn't necessarily turn out. So we might be doing some voiceovers, we might be flipping back and forth to some historic clips during this. Hi, and welcome back to the Save It for Parts channel, where it is far too windy to be doing this intro. Trying to get a good walk-around view up here, but it's just super windy, and probably none of the audio is going to come out at all.